It's the year 1789 in France, and the air is thick with revolution. Or perhaps that's just the choking stench of Parisian gutters fermenting under the summer sun. Either way, you're about to learn firsthand why survival as a French peasant isn't exactly the dream life. You think you can handle hardship? My dear friend, you've barely scratched the surface of misery.
The day begins before dawn because, surprise, sleep is a luxury afforded only to people who don't have to spend every waking hour desperately trying to avoid starvation. You're jolted awake not by the gentle chirping of birds, but by the shrill screech of your neighbor's pig, the one that's somehow still alive despite looking thinner than a political promise. Your hut, let's call it that to preserve your dignity, is a humble affair, a single room, mud walls cracked wide enough to let in the breeze, and every passing insect that thinks it owns the place. You've got a roof made of thatch, which is excellent if you're trying to cultivate a small personal ecosystem of mold and mildew. And when it rains, and oh does it rain, you're essentially living inside a damp loaf of bread. Clothing? Oh, you mean the threadbare linen shirt that's worn thinner than your patience, and the trousers held together by sheer willpower and a rope? Yes, those are your best clothes. And shoes. Don't make me laugh. You've got wooden clogs so uncomfortable they make walking feel like a medieval torture method. If you're lucky, you might wrap bits of old cloth around your feet to keep the splinters from staging a full-scale invasion. Breakfast is a delightful affair. You're presented with a steaming... Oh wait, no. It's just a stale hunk of bread, harder than the cobblestones outside. You try to soften it with a bit of water, but even the water is having second thoughts about being associated with this culinary atrocity. Butter, cheese, eggs, those are distant memories, like a dream you once had about eating real food. Today, you're thankful if you can scrape together a thin broth flavored with nothing but regret. And the air, let's talk about the air. It's a thick, pungent cocktail of sweat, human waste, rotting vegetables, and the occasional burst of gunpowder from distant protests. You inhale deeply and wonder if this is what equality smells like. Spoiler, it isn't. Now, off to the fields you go. The lord of the manor, who incidentally has never known a day of hunger in his silk-cushioned life, expects his dues. You spend hours bent over the land, back screaming, hands blistered, under a sun that seems personally offended by your existence. And don't you dare slack off. The overseer is always lurking nearby with a stick and the moral flexibility of a tax collector. But today is different. Today, there's talk of revolution. The streets of Paris are boiling over. People are gathering, shouting about liberty, fraternity, and equality. Grand words, but you're mostly concerned about whether they involve any actual bread. You wander toward the commotion, stomach rumbling loud enough to startle passing pigeons. You reach the city and immediately regret it. The cobbled streets are ankle-deep in filth. Open sewers run alongside bakeries with empty shelves, and desperate mothers clutch thin, coughing children. Revolutionary fervor fills the air, but so does the overwhelming smell of unwashed humanity. And here you are, wearing clothes that look like they lost a fight with a rabid badger, wondering how you'll survive another day. But hold on, did someone mention the Bastille? That infamous fortress looming over the city like a stone reminder of everything you hate. The people have gathered there, ready to storm it. You're swept up in the crowd before you can protest. Suddenly, you're armed with a pitchfork? Marvelous. Nothing says, "Down with tyranny," like improvised farm equipment. You try to keep up, but between the blisters on your feet and the complete lack of meaningful calories in your system, you're already seeing stars. Is this liberty, or is that just malnutrition setting in? Either way, you press on, chanting slogans you barely understand, because honestly, the alternative is going back home to stare at the walls until hunger finally wins the war. But wait, this just in. The king's troops are approaching. You realize with a sinking feeling that you have the combat experience of a particularly anxious squirrel. Your fellow peasants are equally untrained, but what you lack in military prowess, you make up for in righteous indignation and poor decision-making. Then the soldiers arrive, real soldiers, professional, trained, and more importantly, fully fed. You see their pristine uniforms, shiny boots, and well-fed faces. You, on the other hand, have a sharp stick, a fear-induced limp, and a blood sugar level that's probably negative by now. The confrontation doesn't go well. Shocking, I know. You're knocked flat by the sheer force of a soldier's shove. Your head hits the cobblestones, and for a brief, glorious moment, you think you might finally get some sleep. But no. Someone drags you back to your feet, and the crowd surges forward again. At this point, survival feels more like a theoretical concept than an actual possibility. You wonder if there's a retirement plan for revolutionaries, maybe a quiet job somewhere counting loaves of imaginary bread. But no, reality hits you harder than the soldier's boot did. And should you somehow survive this day of chaos, what awaits you? Back-breaking labor, hunger that gnaws at your insides like a rabid dog, and winters so cold, your very breath seems to freeze mid-air. There's no medical care unless you count the local healer's enthusiastic application of leeches. Got a toothache? That's an excellent reason to have all your teeth yanked out by a man who sterilizes his tools by dipping them in yesterday's wine. You thought training was rough. Try training yourself not to starve while avoiding dysentery, consumption, and the delightful little surprise called typhoid fever. You're not dodging bullets yet, but you are dodging open sewage and rats the size of small dogs. And the fashion. Oh, the fashion. You wear the same shirt for so long, it could probably stand up and walk away on its own. Washing clothes is a dangerous luxury. Why risk pneumonia from wet garments when filth is perfectly acceptable? You're essentially a walking biohazard. But let's say, by some divine miracle, you survive all this. You live long enough to witness the glorious dawn of the Republic. Surely things will get better now, right? Bread for all? Justice? A new era? Not exactly. The guillotine is working overtime. The reign of terror makes yesterday's misery look like a picnic, and you've developed a permanent hunch from all that field work. But at least you'll always have your wooden shoes and that delightful case of chronic malnutrition. So, tell me again, how exactly were you planning to survive this? But you're still standing somehow. Your stomach is practicing the art of cannibalism. devouring itself from the inside, and your feet, your poor feet, have officially declared independence from the rest of your body. You try sitting for a moment near a public square, but the smell of something long dead wafts through the air, and you remember, oh yes, that's the river, the Seine, a majestic flowing cesspit of discarded hopes, rotting carcasses, and the occasional aristocrat who's met an untimely and very watery demise. Just when you think you might have a peaceful moment to contemplate how many of your ribs are now visible through your chest, a bell tolls in the distance. Not a church bell, no. This is the grim chime of Madame Guillotine being wheeled out for her day's work. You shuffle over with the crowd, because what else are you going to do? Your only two entertainment options are watching an execution or staring at the same patch of mold on your wall back home. At least the guillotine offers a bit of variety. The atmosphere at Place de la Révolution is, let's call it festive, in a grim, slightly bloodthirsty way. Children are running about, playing near the wooden scaffold as if it were some grand carnival ride. Women are hawking stale pastries and watered-down wine at prices that would make even the nobility clutch their powdered wigs. You consider buying a half-rotten apple, but your pocket contains exactly 3 sous and a button, which, last you checked, isn't legal tender. The executioner stands tall, wearing his leather apron, his face emotionless and eyes dull from seeing far too many heads roll. He adjusts the blade like a craftsman, taking pride in his tools. You try not to think too hard about how many times that blade has kissed the sun and then kissed a neck in one smooth, brutal arc. And then through the parting crowd, you spot today's star attraction, an aristocrat resplendent even in disgrace, being dragged toward the guillotine. His powdered wig is askew, his face pale, but somehow still managing to look down on the very people who are moments away from cheering his demise. You can't help but admire that level of commitment to snobbery. The drum roll begins, a thundering reminder that this is no mere spectacle. It's justice, served cold and efficiently. The blade glints for a moment in the pale sunlight before it drops with a sickening finality. The crowd roars like they've just witnessed the winning goal at a football match, though the only thing flying through the air is a very well-coiffed head. You try to turn away to muster some dignity, but your stomach has other ideas. The scent of roasting chestnuts hits your nose. Someone rich enough to waste them is flaunting their wealth nearby. Your feet move before your brain can stop them. You follow that smell like a man possessed, only to find it's nothing more than a hopeful illusion. No chestnuts, just some poor soul burning the last of his furniture to stay warm. You sigh so hard, your ribs creak under the effort. Winter comes early and stays long, like that one unwelcome relative who doesn't understand social cues. Your clothes, already inadequate, have now taken on the texture of frozen parchment. Your breath is a visible cloud in the air, and your fingers feel like brittle twigs, one strong gust away from snapping off. And as if things weren't dire enough, the bread prices have gone up. Again. The bakers, fearing for their lives, have taken to keeping their shutters closed and their ovens cold. Bread riots break out across the city. You join one. Because honestly, what else is there to do? The scene is absolute chaos. Women, strong-armed and ferocious, lead the charge like seasoned generals of hunger. They storm the bakeries, wielding rolling pins like war hammers. You, armed with nothing but your hunger and a wildly misplaced sense of optimism, squeeze through the throng toward the counter. You manage to grab a loaf, oh glorious carbs, only to realize it's nothing more than sawdust and flour baked into the rough approximation of bread. You bite into it anyway. It tastes like despair, but it's the most substantial thing you've had in days. Back at home, if you can even call it that anymore, your single-room hovel is now colder inside than it is out. Your straw bed has become home to at least one family of mice who frankly look better fed than you. You try to start a fire, but the only thing left to burn is your hope, and even that's damp with the stink of reality. And the political climate? Delightful chaos. Robespierre is at it again, proclaiming virtue through terror, while the guillotine clatters on like some horrific metronome. Paranoia runs rampant. One wrong word, one wrong glance, and you might find yourself in line for Madame Guillotine's cold embrace. You try to keep your head down, but that's difficult when you're literally standing in a bread line 12 hours a day. And heaven help you if someone thinks you're hoarding. Hoarding? You're one bad cough away from becoming a statistic in the mortality records, and they think you're hiding food. The only thing you've successfully hoarded is disappointment. The rats, let's talk about them. They own the streets now. Fat, confident creatures strutting about like tiny, whiskered landlords. You swear one of them tipped its hat at you the other day as it sauntered off with a chunk of cheese you didn't even know you had. An illness? Oh, it's fashionably in season. Typhoid, dysentery, the charmingly named consumption, which is really just tuberculosis doing its best impression of a slow, dramatic exit. You've developed a cough that sounds like an old church bell, tolling in a storm. Every breath feels like sandpaper dragged across your lungs, but the local healer's only solution is more leeches. You're starting to think the leeches have a better health plan than you do. By the time summer returns, you're a walking skeleton with a limp, 3 teeth to your name, and a facial expression permanently set to mild existential crisis. The revolution rolls on, churning through leaders faster than a hungry mob through a bakery. And yet, despite everything, despite the cold, the hunger, the endless looming threat of death by blade, disease, or bureaucratic incompetence, you somehow manage to stagger on. You, a living testament to the stubbornness of the human spirit and the inability to take a hint. If you consider survival to be the act of technically existing while everything you know and love crumbles to dust around you, then sure, you'd survive. But thrive? My friend, the only thing thriving around here are the rats and the guillotine manufacturers. And as the sun sets over the blood-stained streets of Paris, the air thick with smoke, sorrow, and the faintest hope that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow won't be quite so grim, you crawl into your corner, pull your ragged blanket over your shoulders. and whisper the same words every peasant has uttered for centuries before you. Mon Dieu, what a day! And you sleep, if you can call it that, knowing full well that tomorrow will greet you with the same miserable grin and a brand new set of problems. But hey, at least you're not an aristocrat. They had it much worse. For about 3 seconds. Ah, splendid. You've chosen to wake up today as a French aristocrat. Excellent choice. Silk sheets, velvet drapes, and the faint scent of imported jasmine lingering in the air. Life is simply divine, isn't it? Birds are practically programmed to chirp in the correct musical key outside your window. The servants have already drawn your bath, and by drawn, I mean heated precisely to the temperature of a Mediterranean spring and sprinkled with rose petals you'll barely notice, because frankly, that's their job, isn't it? You stretch languidly, the finest linen grazing your perfectly moisturized skin, and swing your legs out from the bed onto the hand-woven Persian rug. Oh, how it tickles the toes. Breakfast? Already arranged, naturally. A silver tray carries a delicate pastry that took 12 hours to make and will take precisely 3 delicate bites to consume. Croissants flakier than the loyalty of half the nobility, and a hot chocolate drink. Yes, hot chocolate, imagine. Prepared with beans, imported at great expense from the New World, whipped to a froth so airy it could levitate. And yet, something feels off, doesn't it? That faint, irritating sound wafting through the window. No, not the pleasant serenade of a violin. Something more uncivilized. Is that shouting? You shuffle to the balcony, silk robe billowing, only to see it. The crowd. Masses of unwashed, rather displeased commoners cluttering the streets like a badly organized market. They're waving sticks, banners scrawled with unsettling slogans like "Down with the aristocrats" and "Bread or blood." Honestly, the handwriting alone is enough to make you wince. You turn back inside and sigh dramatically. This simply won't do. How are you supposed to enjoy your finely aged Burgundy with the faint possibility of being dragged into the streets by a mob who wouldn't know a proper wine pairing if it hit them square in the face? You call for Jacques, your loyal manservant, who arrives looking more harried than usual. His powdered wig is slightly askew, a worrying sign. You ask, ever so delicately, whether the unrest is serious or just another one of those commoner tantrums that seem to flare up whenever someone remembers how expensive bread has become. Jacques stammers something about the Bastille falling. The Bastille? Oh, what is the world coming to? That dreadful old prison? You were planning to have it converted into a delightful garden terrace someday. You try to dismiss the entire ordeal with a wave of your hand, but then a sudden, more pressing thought crosses your mind. Is it still safe to attend tonight's masquerade ball at the Duc de Montclair's estate? You've spent weeks preparing for it. Your new outfit is a masterpiece. Embroidered gold thread, a waistcoat so tight it could cut off circulation, and shoes with heels higher than your tax contributions, which, if we're honest, are mostly theoretical anyway. But the streets aren't looking terribly welcoming. You hear more shouting now, something about the guillotine. Ah, yes, the latest fashionable trend among the revolutionaries. Quite the conversation starter, that device. Efficient, brutal and very bad for business if you happen to be in the nobility. You spend the day avoiding windows and open balconies, sipping wine with the nervous grace of a man watching his stock portfolio crumble before his very eyes. You make polite conversation with the Comtesse de Beaumont, who assures you with a brittle laugh that this will all blow over soon. The rabble always tire themselves out, she says, swirling her glass. You both laugh, but the laughter is thin, strained, like a violin string about to snap. By evening, there's no question of attending the masquerade. Word has spread that the mobs are marching through the wealthy districts now. Not for sightseeing, mind you. They're looking for, well, you. You look around your opulent chamber, gold leaf mirrors, tapestries worth more than entire villages, and that damned harpsichord you never learned to play, and realize with a creeping chill that none of this will protect you. In fact, it makes you a glowing, golden target. Jacques bursts into the room, eyes wide, face pale. Monsieur, they're coming. You laugh nervously. Coming where, Jacques? To the front door, monsieur. Ah, well, that's rather direct of them, isn't it? You consider fleeing, but to where? You've never even visited the countryside. What's out there anyway? Dirt? And worse, peasants without even the decency to be charmingly picturesque about their poverty. Still, survival instincts, a thing you haven't had to employ since the great wine shortage of '85, kick in. You scramble to gather the essentials, a small fortune in jewels sewn into the lining of your coat, a snuff box gifted by the king himself, surely that must still count for something, and a miniature portrait of your dearly beloved mistress, not your wife, naturally. You've seen her twice this year, and both times you found her terribly exhausting. Jacques leads you through the servants' quarters, a place you've never actually visited before. It smells faintly of turnips and despair. How charming. You navigate a series of back passages, heart pounding with indignation that your life, once a grand symphony of leisure and excess, has now been reduced to sneaking out the back like a common thief. Out on the streets, it's chaos. Fires burn in the distance, the air thick with smoke and the tang of revolution. You try to keep a low profile, which is difficult when your clothing is so extravagant it practically screams, "Behead me, I'm rich." You duck into a darkened alley, tripping over a pile of, oh good heavens, is that a human bone? No, wait, it's just a discarded baguette. Honestly, it's difficult to tell the difference these days. The night is a blur of desperate hiding and near discoveries. You manage to slip past a mob thanks to the quick thinking of Jacques, who, it turns out, has a knack for survival you never appreciated before. You make a mental note to increase his pay, if there's any France left in which to spend it. By dawn, you've reached the outskirts of the city. Your fine shoes are ruined, your wig has been lost to the night, like some tragic relic of a better time, and your delicate hands, soft as butter and equally useless, are now covered in soot and grime. You find refuge in the attic of a farmhouse, lying among sacks of musty grain and contemplating how quickly your world has collapsed. Only days ago, you were deciding whether sapphire or emerald cufflinks better complemented your eyes. Now you're wondering if eating raw turnips will kill you faster than starvation. The days that follow are a masterclass in humiliation. Your wardrobe has been reduced to a tattered cloak and whatever you can scavenge. Your meals, oh the tragedy of it, consist of hard bread, bitter roots, and the occasional blessing of something vaguely edible. You once found a turnip that looked suspiciously like the king. You ate it anyway. Word reaches you of the reign of terror. Nobles dragged from their hiding places, their heads displayed like grotesque trophies. Your heart pounds every time a cart rumbles by, fearing it carries the end of your lineage. Or worse, that someone recognized you. By now, your once flawless skin is chapped and blotchy, your hair a tangled mess, and your mind, well, it's fraying faster than the cuffs of your ruined shirt. You have the constant lingering suspicion that every creak of a floorboard is your last moment of freedom. And yet, even through the hunger, the fear, the indignity, there's a stubborn flicker of that old aristocratic arrogance. You find yourself practicing how you deliver a defiant final speech on the scaffold, something witty, unforgettable. Let them eat cake, you'd say, even though you never actually said that, and it wasn't even your idea in the first place. But the poetry of it all, magnificent. Except when the time comes, if it comes, you're not so sure anymore. You rather like your head exactly where it is, and you're beginning to think that survival, while terribly unfashionable, is far preferable to becoming a cautionary tale. So, could you survive the French Revolution as an aristocrat? Let's be honest, you're physically fragile, mentally unprepared, and have the survival instincts of a fainting goat. But by sheer dumb luck, a bit of help from people far below your station, and an embarrassingly strong will to keep your head attached to your shoulders, you might just pull through.
Just don't expect to find a decent glass of wine for the next decade. A decent glass of wine for the next decade. Welcome to the year 1387. Smells like wet hay, human misery, and something suspiciously similar to a latrine fire. Don't worry, you'll get used to the stench. Or die before you do. Either outcome is quite popular around here. Now, up on your feet, lazy bones. Dawn's breaking, and no, you don't get a morning stretch or a nice cup of tea. You get a cold bucket of questionable water sloshed in your face by Mistress Agnes, whose morning breath could bring down a warhorse. You're in Lord Ethelbert's manor, the grandest pile of drafty stones and rat-infested corridors this side of the Thames. And you? You're the newest servant, which means you rank somewhere between the chamber pot and the pig that lives under the stairs. Your uniform? Oh, you mean the one ragged tunic they tossed at you when you arrived. It smells like it had a previous life, as a plague blanket. Thin as parchment and about as warm, this threadbare wonder does a fine job of ensuring you experience every charming breeze that howls through these glorified stone ruins. Shoes. Don't be ridiculous. You're barefoot, treading carefully to avoid stepping in something organic from the night before. Spoiler, you'll fail. First task of the day, cleaning the Great Hall. That sounds noble, doesn't it? Until you realize cleaning involves sweeping out the leftovers from last night's feast, which includes a duck carcass, at least 3 eel heads, and something that looks suspiciously like a dead cat. Though no one's entirely sure, All the while, you're using a broom made of tied-together twigs that's about as effective as blowing on the mess and hoping it relocates itself. And breakfast. Ah yes, the most important meal of the day. For the lords anyway. For you, it's a hearty portion of pottage, which is just a fancy word for boiled despair. Imagine a thin gruel made of turnips, cabbage, and regret. Occasionally, if the kitchen maid likes you, or more likely pities you, she'll sneak you a bit of bread so hard you could file down a sword on it. By mid-morning, you're summoned to the training yard. No, not to learn swordplay, don't flatter yourself. You're here to clean up after the night's practice. That means collecting splintered practice swords, shoveling horse manure, and trying not to get trampled by Sir Geoffrey, who insists on drunkenly charging his horse at anything that moves, including you. Let's pause a moment to appreciate your living quarters. Down in the servants' quarters, or what we affectionately call the Mould Emporium. It's a stone cellar with precisely one window the size of a squirrel's ear, and a draught that could rival the northern winds. You sleep on a straw mattress, which, fun fact, doubles as a thriving ecosystem for lice and the occasional mouse. You don't so much sleep as you negotiate a nightly truce with the vermin. Lunchtime, oh, you're adorable. No, you don't get lunch, you serve it. Hauling trencher boards of meat to the lord and his knights, dodging the occasional playful dagger thrown your way, and hoping you're not ordered to taste test the wine in case it's poisoned. Remember, you're expendable. Now, if you survive to the afternoon, you're off to the laundry. A charming task that involves scrubbing noble undergarments in the freezing stream, accompanied by the local swans who look at you like they own the place, which, frankly, they do. And those stains on Lord Ethelbert's trousers. Don't ask, just scrub, and keep scrubbing. By evening, your hands are raw, your stomach's a hollow drum, and your back feels like you've personally carried the stone walls of the manor. And yet, oh joy, you're summoned again. This time to the kitchens, where the final indignity awaits. Turning the spit over the fire as the evening roast slowly rotates, dripping juices that will never grace your lips. The lords feast on pheasant and venison, while you're lucky to get the boiled bones tossed your way when they're done. Night falls. You stumble back to the Mould Emporium, where you collapse onto your lice-ridden straw, only to be woken 3 hours later to stoke the manor's fires. Because heaven forbid Lord Ethelbert feels a draught during his snoring symphony upstairs. Now, you might be wondering, how long do you survive this delightful life? If you're lucky, 5 years. More likely, you'll keel over from dysentery, a minor scratch that turned gangrenous, or a fatal accident involving Sir Geoffrey's horse and your face. But hey, at least you've got your health. Wait, no, that's gone too. Well, at least you have friends, right? Oh no, that's right. Everyone here is too busy trying to survive to bother making friends. But look on the bright side. You're gaining valuable experience in humility, manual labor, and the art of not crying where the nobles can see you. So, how are we feeling about this glorious career path now? Still think you could hack it? Or are you ready to sprint barefoot into the nearest forest, live off berries, and take your chances with the wolves? Honestly, I'd recommend the wolves. Ah, but don't worry. You'll wake up tomorrow and do it all again, assuming you wake up at all. Sleep tight. Try not to breathe too deeply. You never know what's growing in that straw. Ah, but wait, we haven't even talked about Sunday. You might think that's your day of rest, right? Wrong. That's the day His Lordship and Lady Ethelberta drag the entire household to church. You'll trudge 5 miles through knee-deep mud in your finest burlap sack. That's right, you've got a special one for the occasion, only slightly less riddled with holes than your work tunic. At church, you don't sit with the noble folk on cushioned benches. No, you stand, if you're lucky, at the back, pressed against the damp stone walls next to old Oswen the dung collector, who smells exactly like his job title suggests. And don't you dare fall asleep, during the priest's 2-hour sermon on humility and obedience. You'll get a swift cuff to the ear from the steward, who's got a mean right hook for a man with a limp. After the service, while the lords stroll home discussing how charitable they are, you're back to work. The churchyard needs tidying, and apparently that's your calling now. Pulling weeds from graves while wondering if you'll be joining them soon. Now let's talk about the great hall banquets. You might think, a feast. Surely the servants get some scraps. Well, technically yes, if by scraps you mean gnawed bones, congealed bits of fat scraped from platters, and a handful of barley that somehow found its way onto the floor. You'll be lucky if you don't have to fight the rats for it. And those rats? They've lived here longer than you and probably have more seniority. Meanwhile, you watch the knights gorge themselves on boar's head, roasted swan, and pies the size of your head. You'd sell your own grandmother for a bite of that buttery crust, but she's probably already working in the kitchens. And those pies, they're not just filled with meat. Sometimes they bake live birds into them for entertainment. Picture this. A noble cracks open the crust, and out flutters a couple of bewildered sparrows. Everyone laughs. You're on standby to catch the poor creatures before they fall into the gravy. As for entertainment, the nobles have their jesters and minstrels. You have, well, occasionally you might be the entertainment. Last week, poor Edwin was shoved onto the table and forced to dance a jig after accidentally dropping Lord Ethelbert's goblet. Broke 3 toes doing it. Still has to work the kitchens, mind you. Just with a bit more hobbling and a lot more weeping. And speaking of kitchens, let's take a little tour. The heat alone could boil the brains out of your skull. The air is thick with the smell of burning fat, smoke, and the ever-present odor of something singed. You stir massive cauldrons with a wooden paddle the size of a battering ram, and if the stew gets a little extra crunch from the splinters that fall in, no one's complaining. Probably adds flavor. Now, in case you thought you had the night off, guess again. Some nights, you're called to the solar, the private chamber where the lord and lady retire. But don't get any grand ideas. You're just there to stoke the fire and stand in the corner in case they decide they need something. You'll stand there for hours, eyes fixed firmly on the tapestry, because heaven help you if you look directly at the lady, until you're dismissed sometime around midnight. On your way back to the servants' quarters, you might pass by the armory. Rows of gleaming weapons, polished and deadly. And for a brief, delirious moment, you might wonder, what if? But you quickly remember that the last servant who thought about rebellion ended up as a cautionary tale and as an exhibit in the courtyard. But chin up. If you manage to survive long enough, say into your 30s, you might earn the coveted position of senior servant. That means instead of carrying heavy loads, you get to supervise others carrying heavy loads. The pay's the same, nothing, but at least you die of back pain instead of outright exhaustion. And if you're really lucky, you might even avoid the Black Death. Oh, didn't I mention that charming little guest? Every now and then, the plague comes wandering through like an uninvited uncle at a wedding, taking a good third of the village with it. One day you're scrubbing out the Great Hall, the next you're coughing up blood and wondering why the rats look so smug. And let's not forget the weather. Summer is a blazing inferno where you'll sweat through your single crusty layer of clothing and pray for rain that doesn't turn the roads into swamps. Winter? Winter is when you discover that frostbite isn't just for noble adventurers, it's for servants too. You'll huddle under a threadbare blanket that smells like something crawled inside and died. And then another thing crawled in and ate it. So, my friend, you still think you'd survive the life of a medieval servant? Be honest. This isn't some charming peasant life from a storybook. This is back-breaking, soul-crushing, ankle-deep in misery kind of living. But hey, at least you're not a serf tied to the land. Oh wait, that is you. You don't just serve in the manor, You also owe labor to the local lord. That's right, a few days each week you're out in the fields, breaking your back in the barley fields under a sun so hot it could bake bread on your skull. And when you return, straight back to the kitchens or the laundry. Sleep is for the dead, which, statistically speaking, you will be quite soon. But don't despair entirely. There are occasional joys, like the village fair, where you might see a dancing bear or a man who claims to eat fire. Of course, you can't afford anything at the fair, but you can stand at the edge and wonder what it's like to taste a roasted apple instead of turnip stew. And sometimes, on a rare moonlit night, you'll sneak out with the other servants, sit by the riverbank, and share a stale crust of bread while singing songs about how much life stinks. That's about as close to happiness as you'll get. So sleep tight, brave servant. Tomorrow's another day of glory, by which I mean back-breaking toil, hunger, and the faint but ever-present hope that the rats might finally leave your sleeping space alone. And if they don't, well, at least you've got company. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's video, and I hope to see you again real soon. But we haven't even touched on the joys of special assignments. You see, when you're not grinding grain until your hands bleed or scrubbing vomit from marble floors, you might find yourself on an errand for Lady Flavia, the Dominus's ever-demanding wife. She'll send you scurrying across Rome in the midday heat to fetch her favorite perfume from Alexandria. Never mind that Alexandria is 2,000 miles away. You'd better return by sunset or face her infamous wooden spoon, which she wields like a battle-hardened centurion. And don't think you're safe from the Dominus's whims either. Some nights, after far too much Falernian wine, he'll decide he fancies a bit of philosophy and summon you, yes, you, to stand there while he drunkenly debates the finer points of Stoicism with his equally inebriated friends. You'll be expected to nod sagely, as if you too have pondered the meaning of life between scrubbing latrines and dodging airborne sandals hurled in drunken rants. Occasionally, he'll ask for your opinion on some grand matter of state, why the grain prices have risen, whether the Parthians pose a threat. And before you can even stammer out a word, he'll burst into laughter at the very thought of a servant having opinions. And heaven forbid the Dominus decides to throw a grand spectacle. Ah yes, the Convivium Magnificum. This isn't your regular evening feast. This is a full-blown circus of excess. You'll spend 3 days preparing, sleeping barely an hour between tasks, roasting entire oxen, seasoning delicacies you'll never taste, and arranging elaborate centerpieces featuring live animals. Yes, live animals. Who can forget the infamous night when a startled peacock broke free from the table display and flew straight into the Dominus's face? That was a memorable beating for the poor soul responsible for securing the decorative poultry. Now let's discuss illness, because if the labor doesn't kill you, the local plague certainly will. The crowded streets of Rome are a veritable breeding ground for every pestilence under the sun. And since servants sleep near the latrines and work in the filth of the kitchens and laundries, you're often the first to fall ill. But don't expect rest. Oh no. You'll still be dragged from your pallet to tend to the Dominus's needs, hacking up your lungs between serving platters of honeyed dormice. And when you inevitably collapse from fever, they'll simply roll you aside and bring in the next unlucky wretch to take your place. If you recover, miraculously, it's straight back to work. If not, well, at least you'll finally get some rest, albeit of the permanent variety. But perhaps you're thinking, if I work hard enough, maybe I'll earn my freedom. Oh, sweet summer child, manumission is indeed a thing. Freed men do exist. But for every lucky servant who scrapes together the fortune or favor needed to buy their freedom, there are 100 more who die with shackles still heavy on their souls. And even if you do earn your freedom, what then? You're a nobody in the empire, with no property, no trade, and no friends. Your best hope is becoming a beggar on the steps of the Forum, living off scraps and the occasional pity of a passing patrician who finds your destitution amusing. And let's not forget those occasional visits from the census takers. When they arrive, everything must be in perfect order. You'll spend days polishing every surface, arranging every scroll and amphora just so. And if the dominus is found lacking in wealth or status, heads will roll, and yours is conveniently located at the chopping block of accountability. Now, about the Saturnalia festival. You might think this is a time of joy, freedom, and celebration for servants, right? Wrong again. For one glorious day, the masters pretend the servants are equals. You're allowed to speak freely, wear the master's clothing, even sit at the feast. But don't get too comfortable, because come dawn, everything goes back to normal. And if you dared insult anyone too honestly during your brief freedom, you'll find yourself reassigned to duties so foul even the rats pity you. And those duties, let me introduce you to the Cloaca Maxima, the grand sewer of Rome. Occasionally, the pipes get clogged. Care to guess who's sent down into the belly of the empire with nothing but a small oil lamp and a shovel? That's right, you. Just hope you don't slip. People who go missing down there don't tend to come back, and if they do, well, let's just say no amount of bathing in the Tiber will ever wash that stench away. But don't let me depress you entirely. There are bright spots in this wretched life. Like the one time the Dominus left for his estate in Capua, and the house was yours to manage. 2 whole days without being called a lazy mule or having a sandal thrown at your head. You almost felt human. Of course, that ended when the Dominus returned unexpectedly and found his wine cellar suspiciously light. You're still not sure how many lashings you took for that one, but you're confident it was a record. That's all for tonight. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you again shortly.